The Galactic Confederation, a grand alliance of dozens of alien species, was once a shining example of unity in a chaotic galaxy. Built on shared goals of peace, trade, and mutual defense, it had stood strong for nearly 2 centuries. But now that unity was beginning to crumble, the Grand Council chambers aboard Unity Spire, an enormous space station orbiting a neutral star, were filled with tense voices and distrustful stares. Commander Elise Kell of Earth sat at the human delegation table, watching the chaos unfold. She wasn't a politician. She was a strategist, a problem solver. With sharp brown eyes and her dark hair pulled into a tight braid, she looked out of place among the long flowing robes and elaborate alien attire. Yet when she stood to speak, the noise died down. "Honorable council members," Elise began, her voice steady, "we all know the situation. Trade routes are collapsing. Piracy is on the rise. Species are withdrawing their fleets and supplies. But this alliance isn't broken yet. There's still time to save it, if we act now." Across the table, Ambassador Threxan of the Threxian Dominion, a tall, crystalline alien with a voice like ringing glass, clicked his fingers together in a dismissive gesture. "Commander Kale, your species is new to the Confederation. You speak of bold plans, but do you truly understand the weight of what you suggest?" Elise didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Ambassador, maybe being new gives us an advantage. We're not stuck in the old ways. Humanity believes there's always a way forward, even when the path isn't clear." The murmurs in the chamber rose again, some agreeing, others scoffing. From the shadows, Cleric, a Morvite engineer, observed the debate. Morvites were insectoid aliens, with multifaceted eyes and fine antennae that twitched when they were deep in thought. Cleric admired humans for their optimism, though he knew others found it irritating. Ambassador Sulara of the Jularan Alliance leaned forward. Her species, known for their calm demeanor and almost musical voices, rarely raised their tone. "Commander Elise, you speak with passion, but passion alone cannot fix this. The Confederation is falling apart because trust is gone. Without trust, no grand plan can succeed." Elise took a breath, choosing her next words carefully. "You're right, Ambassador Sulara. Trust has been broken. But it's not gone. It's just buried under fear and doubt. And we can rebuild it, step by step, if we're willing to try." The council fell silent again. Outside the chamber's massive viewport, the stars stretched endlessly into the void. Somewhere out there, trade ships were stranded, colonies were running low on supplies, and border outposts were growing more vulnerable by the day. After the meeting adjourned, Elise found herself walking along one of Unity Spire's observation decks. The glow of a distant nebula painted the floor in hues of blue and gold. Cleric approached, his clawed feet clicking softly on the polished floor. "You spoke boldly in there, Commander," he said, his voice buzzing faintly. "But do you really believe it? That we can fix this?" Elise turned to face him. "I have to believe it, Cleric, because if we don't, then the Confederation is finished, and billions of lives will suffer because of it." Cleric tilted his head, his antennae twitching. "Your people are strange, Commander. Always so, persistent." She chuckled softly. "We call it stubbornness where I'm from." For a moment, they stood in silence, watching a cargo freighter drift past the station's outer hull. Elise spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "I have an idea. It's ambitious, and it'll take every species working together. But if we pull it off, it could stabilize the entire Confederation." Cleric's eyes glimmered with curiosity. "What kind of idea?" Elise hesitated, then said, "A decentralized network, a way for every species to communicate, share resources, and coordinate without relying on a single governing body. Humanity's been experimenting with something similar on Earth. I think it could work here too, on a galactic scale." The Morvite engineer considered her words carefully. "It's risky. Many will resist change, even if it's for their own good." "Change always comes with resistance," Elise said firmly. But we're running out of time. The Confederation doesn't need another debate. It needs action. Kileric nodded slowly. Very well, Commander. Tell me more about your plan. Perhaps there is hope yet. The two of them stood together, small figures against the vast backdrop of the cosmos. Somewhere deep in the heart of the Galactic Confederation, the first flicker of hope sparked to life. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was there. And sometimes, hope is all you need to start a revolution. The next few days were filled with tense meetings, late-night brainstorming sessions, and a constant stream of reports about failing trade routes and pirate activity. But through it all, Commander Elise Kale remained focused on her vision, a new kind of system that could hold the Confederation together. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that if anyone could make it work, it was humanity. The idea she had in mind was revolutionary, a decentralized communication and resource network, one that could connect every species in the Confederation without relying on a central authority. It would be built on adaptive artificial intelligence, designed to learn and adjust to the needs of each member species, ensuring that everyone's voice could be heard and no one would fall through the cracks. Elise gathered a small group of experts from Earth, along with a few curious allies from other species. Kileric, the Morvite engineer she had spoken to earlier, was the first to arrive. His species' technical expertise was legendary, but many still viewed the Morvites as distant and difficult to work with. Still, Kileric had always appreciated humanity's boldness, and Elise's idea intrigued him. "You truly believe this network can work?" Kileric asked, his antennae twitching with interest as he looked over the plans. "It's ambitious, and the risks are enormous." Elise smiled, though there was a hint of worry in her eyes. "I believe it has to work, Kileric. If we don't try something this drastic, the Confederation will fall apart completely. This is our last chance. We'll need more than just words to convince the others," Kileric warned. "Many species have grown complacent in their power. The Threxians won't easily accept this, nor will the Jularan." Elise nodded, her face hardening with determination. "I know, but we have no choice. If they resist, we'll show them why this network is the only way forward." The first step was to present the idea to the Council. Elise and Kileric worked late into the night, refining the details and creating simulations to demonstrate how the network could function. The more they worked, the more Elise felt the weight of the task ahead. She had never backed down from a challenge. But this was different. This wasn't just a military strategy or a battle to be won. It was a fight for the future of the entire Confederation. The day of the presentation arrived, and Elise stood before the Council again. This time, she wasn't just a representative from Earth. She was the face of a new hope for the entire galaxy. The room was filled with skeptical faces, some old allies and some enemies disguised as diplomats. She could feel the tension in the air as she began to speak. "Honorable Council members," she began, her voice steady but strong. "You've heard the stories of how the Confederation is falling apart, how pirates roam the trade routes unchecked, how once strong alliances are now breaking. The system we've built is no longer enough. But I believe that if we act now, we can build something better. A system that doesn't rely on a single authority, a network of cooperation, where every species can communicate and share resources freely." The room was silent for a moment. Then, Ambassador Threxen spoke, his voice sharp like the sound of glass shattering. "Commander Kale, this sounds like madness, a network that could connect us all. The risks are far too great. What happens if this system fails? What if the data is corrupted? What if an enemy species hijacks it?" Elise stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "If we don't try, we're already lost. This network is designed to adapt and defend itself. The AI behind it is smart, smarter than any single leader or government. We can protect the system from sabotage. And if one species tries to hijack it, the others will notice. This isn't about trusting one person or one government. It's about trusting each other." The Threxian ambassador's sharp eyes narrowed. And you think we, the greatest minds in the galaxy, will trust an AI created by humans? Elisa's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. Yes, because it's not just humans creating it. Every species that agrees to join in will have a say in how the network operates. No one will be left out. The Jularan ambassador, Silara, spoke next, her voice smooth and measured. Commander Kale, your proposal is bold, but it's also dangerous. We've all seen what happens when trust is misplaced. The Confederation has its flaws, but a decentralized system could easily spiral out of control. What guarantees do you offer? Guarantees aren't what we need right now, Elise replied. What we need is courage. Courage to take a chance on something that could save us all. This network is a leap of faith, yes, but it's a leap we have to take, or else we risk falling into chaos. Cleric stood by her side, adding his voice to the conversation. I have worked with Commander Kale on the technical details. This network is not a human experiment. It's a solution for the entire Confederation. If we work together, it will succeed. If we stand apart, we will fail. The room fell into another tense silence. For a long moment, it seemed as if no one would speak. But slowly, one by one, the ambassadors began to nod, some reluctantly, some with cautious hope. I'll support this plan, Silara said softly, but only if we can ensure that every species has an equal voice in its development. The others followed suit, some still wary, but all agreeing to give it a chance. Elise felt a rush of relief, but she knew the hardest part was still ahead. She had secured the Council's approval, but now she would have to make sure the network actually worked. As the meeting ended, Elise and Cleric exchanged a look. They had taken the first step, but the journey ahead would be even harder. We're not out of danger yet, Cleric said, his voice thoughtful. No, Elise agreed, but we've got a chance, and that's more than we had a few days ago. With the first victory behind them, they turned their attention to the next phase. They had a galaxy to save. The approval from the Council was just the beginning. As soon as the decision was made, the real work began. Elise Kale and her team set to work immediately, reaching out to allies across the Confederation to begin building the decentralized network. They needed to ensure that every species had access to it, that the system was secure and fair, and that it could adapt to the needs of the galaxy's diverse inhabitants. It was an enormous task, one that would require every ounce of ingenuity humanity had to offer, and the cooperation of every species willing to give it a chance. But even as the project began to take shape, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had always been a strategist, but she was also a realist. The moment they started to make progress, the cracks in the Confederation became more apparent. It wasn't just the usual political disagreements. There was something deeper at play, something sinister. Reports began to surface of strange sabotage attempts on the network's early infrastructure. It started small, data being corrupted here and there, communication lines going down at odd hours. But as the days passed, the incidents grew more frequent and more dangerous. Elise gathered her team, including Cleric, in a secure briefing room aboard Unity Spire. She stood at the head of the table, her brow furrowed in thought. This isn't random, she said, pacing back and forth. Someone's trying to stop us before we can even get started. And they're not just targeting us. They're targeting the entire Confederation. Cleric's antennae twitched nervously. You think it's an inside job? Someone within the Confederation? Elise didn't need to answer right away. The signs were clear. The sabotage wasn't just the work of pirates or independent agents. It was coordinated. Someone knew exactly how to exploit the weaknesses in their system. But who? The Morvate engineer stood up, a serious look on his face. I'll begin investigating the code and network access logs. It may take some time, but I'll find something. Do it, Elise said. We need to know who's behind this before they do any real damage. As Cleric dove into his investigation, Elise turned her attention to other areas. She knew they had to stay focused on the bigger picture, even as the sabotage threatened to unravel their progress. The entire Confederation depended on this network. If it failed now, it would be years, maybe decades, before they could even think of another solution. But the more Elise thought about it, the more she realized that someone wanted to keep the galaxy divided. The idea of a united confederation, where every species shared resources and information freely, was a direct threat to certain factions. Some species thrived on power, control, and isolation. A decentralized network would undermine everything they had built. Days turned into weeks as the team worked tirelessly to strengthen the network, but the sabotage didn't stop. At one point, an entire relay station, set up to help connect remote colonies to the new system, was destroyed in an explosion. No one was hurt, but it was a clear message. As the situation grew more dangerous, the Elise started reaching out to trusted allies within the Confederation. She knew she needed help, and soon. Ambassador Silara of the Jularan Alliance was one of the first to offer support. Despite the Jularan's cautious nature, Silara had always believed in the potential for unity. "I've been hearing whispers about some of the older guard in the Confederation," Silara told Elise in a secure communication. "There are those who fear that if the network succeeds, they'll lose their power. They've been talking about breaking off from the Confederation entirely, taking their resources with them." Elise's heart sank. "But they're not the ones causing the sabotage, are they?" "I don't know," Silara admitted. "But I have my suspicions. The ones who are opposed to this new system, the ones who profit from the chaos and division. They'll do whatever it takes to stop you." Elise knew Silara was right. There were factions in the Confederation that had grown too comfortable with their own power. If the network succeeded, they would lose their influence. The idea of a united, cooperative galaxy was a threat to everything they stood for. But knowing the enemy was one thing, finding them was another. As the investigation continued, Kileric uncovered something disturbing. "I've traced the code modifications to a group within the Jularan delegation," he said, his voice grim. "They're well placed within the network's infrastructure. If we don't act quickly, they could cripple the entire project." Elise clenched her fists. She had hoped she was wrong. The Jularan had been one of their strongest supporters, but now it seemed that some of their own had turned against the very alliance they had sworn to protect. "We need to confront them," Elise said, "but carefully. If we move too fast, we risk losing everything." Kileric nodded, understanding the delicate balance. "We'll need to gather evidence first. We can't make any accusations without proof." As the investigation into the sabotage continued, Elise found herself facing a growing sense of betrayal. The Confederation was falling apart from the inside, and the question wasn't just who was sabotaging the network. It was why they had waited until now. Why had they chosen to strike just when humanity's plan for unity was beginning to take shape? Elise knew one thing for sure. If the Confederation didn't stand together now, they would never survive the coming storm. And with time running out, she had to act fast, before the shadows of betrayal consumed everything they had worked for. The situation was becoming more dire by the day. The sabotage was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a full-blown crisis. The fragile alliance that held the Confederation together was teetering on the edge of collapse. Commander Elise Kale knew that they couldn't afford to wait any longer. The longer the perpetrators remained hidden, the more damage they could do. The network that could save the galaxy was slipping through their fingers. Kileric worked tirelessly, scanning code and tracking network access logs, determined to uncover the truth. Elise spent her days reaching out to trusted allies, trying to gather as much support as possible. She knew the Jularan Alliance had factions within it that were questioning the project, but she had never expected betrayal to come from within. It was late one evening when Kileric finally found something that would change everything. The Morvite engineer's voice crackled through the communication line. "Commander Kale, you need to see this." Elise rushed to his location, her heart pounding. She could sense the urgency in his voice. When she arrived in the secure room where Kaleric had been working, she saw him sitting in front of a holographic display, his antennae twitching with focus. "I traced the sabotages," Kaleric said without looking up. "The modifications to the network code. They came from a specific group within the Jularan delegation. They've been hiding in plain sight, using their access to infiltrate key systems." Elise felt her stomach tighten. "Are you sure?" Kaleric nodded. "The evidence is undeniable. I've traced their movements through the network, and I've pinpointed exactly where the sabotage originated. They've been working with a few individuals from the Threxian Dominion." Elise's mind raced. The Threxians were not known for their subtlety, and their involvement made everything more complicated. It meant that there were factions within the Confederation working against the network, not just out of fear of losing power, but because they wanted to control the galaxy for themselves. "We need to expose this," Elise said, her voice cold with resolve. "If we don't act now, they'll have us all at each other's throats. We can't let them win." Kaleric's eyes narrowed as he studied the data. "I agree, but we need solid proof before we confront them. If we make a mistake, we risk alienating our allies." Elise took a deep breath. She knew Kaleric was right. They needed to be careful. The Jularan Alliance had always been a strong supporter of the Confederation, and accusing them without clear evidence would do irreparable damage. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized they had no other choice. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. "We'll gather the evidence we need," she said, her tone determined. "Then we'll present it to the Council. They'll have no choice but to take action." The next few days were spent carefully collecting all the evidence they could find. Elise and Kaleric worked together, carefully piecing together the web of sabotage. The Jularan traders had been clever. They'd covered their tracks well. But Kaleric's skills were unmatched, and slowly the puzzle began to take shape. As the pieces came together, Elise couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. She had always believed in the power of unity, but now she wasn't so sure. If the Confederation could not hold together in the face of betrayal, what hope did they have for the future? After several tense days, the evidence was clear. The Jularan delegation, along with certain elements of the Threxian Dominion, had been working together to destabilize the network. They were hoping to create enough chaos to drive a wedge between the species, ensuring that no one would trust the new system and that they could continue to rule in isolation. Elise knew that revealing this information would be a gamble. Some members of the Council would want to sweep it under the rug, not wanting to risk further division. But others would understand the severity of the situation. It would be a test, one that could determine the future of the Confederation. With the evidence in hand, Elise called for an emergency council meeting. It was a risk, but it was the only way forward. She needed the council to see the truth, to understand that the threat wasn't just from outside the Confederation. It was coming from within. As the council members assembled, Elise stood at the head of the table, her gaze unwavering. The faces before her were a mix of skepticism, concern, and outright hostility. She could feel the tension in the room, but she knew that now was the time to act. "Honorable council members," Elise began, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of the truth she was about to reveal. "I come before you with grave news. The sabotage of the new network has not been the work of random criminals or rogue factions. It has been the work of individuals within our own ranks. Specifically, members of the Jularan delegation and the Threxian Dominion have conspired to undermine the network in order to maintain their power." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. The Jularan representatives immediately began to protest, but Elise held up a hand, silencing them. "I have the evidence," she said, pulling up the holographic display that Kaleric had put together. The data laid out everything. Every access log, every modified line of code, every point of interference. There was no denying it. The Jularan ambassador, Silara, looked pale. This is not true." "I'm afraid it is, Ambassador," Elise replied, her voice firm. "And the evidence speaks for itself. The room fell silent. The council members were stunned, their faces filled with disbelief. But Elise could see the shift happening. Some were already beginning to look at each other with suspicion. The truth was out now, and the Confederation could never go back to how it had been. "We cannot allow this betrayal to continue," Elise said, her voice growing stronger. "We must act swiftly and decisively. If we do not, the Confederation will crumble under the weight of its own corruption. We must stand together now, or we will fall apart." The silence stretched on, but this time it was different. The truth had been exposed, and the only question now was what they would do with it. The room was thick with tension as the council members absorbed the shocking revelations. Some were still trying to deny the truth, while others sat in stunned silence, unable to believe that the very institutions they had trusted could be corrupted from within. The Jularan ambassadors were in an uproar, but Elise Kale remained calm, her expression unwavering. She knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that it was the only path left. "The evidence is clear," Elise said, her voice steady, "and we cannot ignore it. The conspirators must be held accountable. If we allow this betrayal to go unpunished, we risk losing the trust of every species in the Confederation. We must show them that we will not tolerate treachery, no matter where it comes from." Ambassador Silara of the Jularan, though pale, quickly regained her composure. "This is a grave accusation," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "I would never condone such actions. You are accusing our people of sabotage without proof." "You have the proof," Elise replied. "The data is irrefutable." The Threxian representatives, who had been sitting silently at the back of the room, exchanged uneasy glances. Their species was known for its aggressive tactics, but Elise had no doubt that they were just as guilty as the Jularan. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. "Enough," said Admiral Valon, a seasoned leader from the Rithari Alliance, who had been observing the proceedings carefully. "This is not the time for finger-pointing and accusations. The Confederation is on the brink of collapse, and we have to decide what comes next. Do we let this betrayal tear us apart, or do we take action to restore our unity?" Elise nodded, grateful for the Admiral's level-headed approach. "Exactly," she said. "This is not just about punishing those who have betrayed us. This is about saving the Confederation. We cannot afford to let the enemies of unity win." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Some were still visibly shaken by the news, while others were deep in thought, weighing their options. Elise knew that this was the moment of truth. She had exposed the betrayal, but now the council had to make a choice. Would they stand with her, or would they allow the Confederation to fall into chaos? After a long pause, Ambassador Varys, the representative from the Zenthri coalition, spoke up. "Commander Kale is right. We cannot ignore what has been uncovered. The Confederation has always been built on trust, and if that trust is broken, we lose everything. We must take decisive action." There were murmurs of agreement from around the room, and slowly the tide seemed to turn in Elise's favor. The Jularan representatives, however, remained quiet, their expressions hard and guarded. Elise could see the struggle in their eyes. They were not ready to admit the truth, but she knew they would have to eventually. The Confederation could not survive without honesty and accountability. "The question now is what we do next," Admiral Valon continued. "Do we allow this betrayal to tear us apart, or do we rally together and push forward? We must be united if we are to overcome this crisis." Elise took a deep breath. The next few hours would determine the fate of the Confederation. It was a delicate moment, one that could go either way. But in her heart, Elise felt a deep conviction. She had come this far, and she couldn't back down now. "We must take action," she said firmly. "We need to dismantle the factions responsible for this sabotage. We need to expose the traitors for what they are. But we also need to offer a way forward. We must ensure that the Confederation remains intact, that the species who want to work together can continue to do so." "Agreed," said Ambassador Varys. "But we must also be cautious. If we move too quickly, we risk further destabilizing the situation. Elise nodded. I understand, Ambassador. We need to be strategic, but we cannot allow these traitors to divide us any further. If we don't act now, we may lose everything. As the discussion continued, Elise could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The council was divided, but the majority seemed to be leaning toward action. Some were still uncertain, but Elise was determined. She had seen firsthand the strength of humanity's resolve, and she knew that if they could unite, they could overcome anything. Hours passed as the council debated the best course of action. It was clear that the path forward would not be easy. But at the end of the day, Elise was confident that the Confederation still had a chance. It would take time, effort, and cooperation, but it was possible. Finally, the council reached a decision. They would begin the process of isolating the traitors and securing the network. They would not allow the sabotage to continue, and they would do everything in their power to restore trust and unity to the Confederation. The next steps would be crucial, but for the first time in weeks, Elise felt a glimmer of hope. As the meeting broke up, Elise walked out into the corridor, her mind still racing. The weight of the responsibility was overwhelming, but she knew that they had made the right choice. The Confederation was not lost yet, and as long as there was hope, there was still a chance to rebuild. But there was no time to rest. The work had only just begun. The conspirators would not give up easily, and the fight for the future of the galaxy was far from over. Elise knew that the storm was coming, but she also knew that humanity would stand strong, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Confederation would survive, and together they would fight for a better future. The decision had been made. The Council had spoken, and the action to isolate the traitors was set in motion. But Elise Kale knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The Confederation was at a crossroads, and the path ahead was fraught with challenges. The sabotage had revealed a deep divide, and while some factions were eager to move forward, others were still unsure. The galaxy was on the brink, and Elise felt the weight of the responsibility more than ever. Elise walked through the corridors of Unity Spire, the base that had once been a symbol of hope for the Confederation. Now it felt heavy, burdened with the tension of what was to come. The halls were quieter than usual, and the air felt thick with uncertainty. She could hear whispers, the soft murmur of the crew and council members discussing what had transpired. The debate was far from over, and Elise knew that there would be no easy answers. Her mind drifted to the events of the last few weeks, the betrayal, the sabotage, the cracks in the Confederation's foundation. Each new discovery had been more disturbing than the last, and the road to recovery seemed endless. But she also knew one thing: they couldn't stop now. She had seen the strength of humanity in the darkest moments, and it was that strength that would see them through. If they could stay united, if they could keep moving forward, they might just have a chance to rebuild the shattered trust. But Elise knew that not everyone shared that vision. The factions that had conspired to destroy the network were not going to give up easily. They had too much to lose. She had heard the rumors, the whispers of a rebellion growing in the shadows. There were still those who believed that the Confederation was better off divided, that the old ways should remain. And as much as Elise wanted to believe in the possibility of peace, she knew that some would never accept the idea of true unity. She entered the command center, where Kileric, the Morvate engineer who had worked tirelessly to track down the sabotage, was waiting. His usual calm demeanor was now tinged with worry. He was hunched over his console, his antennae twitching with focus. "Have you found anything new?" Elise asked as she approached. Kileric looked up, his expression grave. "Yes, it's worse than we thought. The traitors have moved quickly. They've managed to disrupt communications across several key colonies. There's talk of protests, even riots. Some factions are rallying behind their cause, pushing for a complete break from the Confederation." Elise's heart sank. A rebellion. Kileric nodded. "It seems so. The unrest is growing. And the more they disrupt the network, the more they push the galaxy to the brink. It's not just about sabotaging the network anymore. It's about making people believe that the Confederation can't protect them. They'd want to create chaos. Elisa's mind raced. This was exactly what she had feared. The sabotage was never just about the network. It was about fracturing the very foundation of the Confederation. If they couldn't unite the galaxy now, if they couldn't stop the chaos from spreading, they would lose everything. What can we do? Elise asked, her voice filled with determination. We need to act fast, Kilaric replied. We can't afford to wait for more sabotage to occur. We have to restore communications, get the network back online, and show the people that the Confederation is still strong. But most importantly, we need to isolate the rebels before they can gain any real power. Elise nodded. We'll need all the support we can get. I'll contact the council, inform them of the situation. We can't do this alone. Agreed, Kilaric said. But we also need to be careful. If the traitors have people within the council, we'll need to be prepared for anything. Trust will be our biggest challenge. Elise understood. Trust had always been the glue that held the Confederation together, but now it was crumbling. The very people they had once called allies were now part of the problem. How could they rebuild trust when it had been shattered so completely? How could they move forward when the shadows of betrayal loomed over them? But Elise didn't have the luxury of doubt. She had to believe that the Confederation was still worth saving. If they didn't act, they would lose everything. The galaxy's future depended on their ability to stay united. I'll start with the Zenthri Coalition, Elise said, her voice filled with resolve. They've always supported the cause of unity. If we can secure their backing, we may be able to rally others to our side. Kilaric nodded. I'll work on securing the network's integrity. If we can restore communications, it will give us a powerful tool to counter the rebellion's influence. As Elise left the command center, she could feel the weight of the coming storm. Time was running out. The Confederation was on the brink, and the chaos was spreading faster than they could contain it. She had to act quickly, but she also had to be careful. The lines between friend and foe were becoming increasingly blurred. Every move they made now could be their last. She called a meeting with the council, determined to keep the momentum going. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and Elise would not let it slip away. Hours later, she stood before the council once more, her expression resolute. The situation is worse than we feared, she began. The traitors have ignited a rebellion, and they are rallying those who believe the Confederation is no longer capable of protecting them. We need to act now, before the flames of chaos consume everything we've worked for. We're ready to take action, Admiral Valon said, but we can't do it alone. We need support from every faction. The entire galaxy is watching us. Then we must show them that we will stand together, Elise said, her voice filled with conviction. We can't afford to let fear divide us any longer. The Confederation must remain united, or we will lose everything. The council nodded in agreement, the first signs of unity sparking in the room. But Elise knew that this was only the beginning. The storm was coming, and the real fight had only just begun. The war for the future of the Confederation had officially begun. After weeks of covert movements, the truth was finally out, and the time for action had come. Commander Elise Kale stood in front of the council once more, the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. The galaxy's fate rested on their shoulders, and she was determined to ensure that the Confederation would not be torn apart by the rebellion that was threatening its unity. The situation has escalated, Elise said, her voice steady. The traitors we uncovered are not backing down. They are using fear and distrust to tear apart everything we've worked for. If we do not act swiftly and decisively, we risk losing everything. The people need to know that the Confederation is still strong and united. The room was filled with tense silence as the council members exchanged wary glances. It had become clear that some were still uncertain. The rebellion's influence was growing, and the idea of splitting apart was still an appealing option for many. Elise knew she had to make them see reason, or everything would be lost. "We must act now," she continued, her tone firm. "We cannot let fear control us. The Confederation is built on trust, and if we give up on that now, we lose the very foundation of everything we've built. We will show the galaxy that we stand together, and we will end this rebellion before it can spread any further." Admiral Valon spoke up, his voice calm but resolute. "We've already prepared our forces to respond. We know where the rebels are gathering, but we can't do it alone. We need the support of every faction. If we fight amongst ourselves, we lose the war before it even begins." Elise nodded in agreement. "We have to unite the Confederation. Every species must see the benefit of standing together. If we can convince the colonies that this rebellion is a threat to all of us, we may have a chance." "But how do we rebuild trust?" asked Ambassador Varys from the Zenthri Coalition. "The sabotage, the lies, everything that's happened. It's hard to see a way forward." "We rebuild trust by acting with integrity," Elise replied. "We've made mistakes, but we can make things right. We'll expose the rebels, show the people who they truly are, and restore the transparency that was lost. We'll lead by example." The council members were silent, deep in thought. They had already seen the consequences of division, and the idea of staying united was beginning to resonate with them. The conflict, though still bitter, had awakened something in the leaders of the Confederation, an understanding that their strength lay in their unity. Then it settled. Admiral Valon said at last, "We'll begin the operation at once, but we'll need full cooperation from every member. The rebellion's leaders are clever, and they have infiltrated key areas of the Confederation. We must act before they can cause any more damage." The meeting was adjourned, and Elise stepped out of the council chambers, her mind racing. The next few days would be crucial. They had a plan, but the stakes were higher than ever. Every move they made would be scrutinized, and any mistake could tip the balance in favor of the rebels. As she made her way back to her quarters, she was joined by Cleric, the Morvate engineer who had been indispensable throughout the investigation. His calm demeanor, though usually comforting, was now filled with worry. "I've been tracking the rebels' movements," Cleric said. "They're using encrypted channels to communicate. If we're going to stop them, we need to gain control of their communications first. But it won't be easy. They've set up multiple layers of security." "We'll do whatever it takes," Elise replied, her voice firm. "We can't let them spread any further. We need to hit them where it hurts." The days that followed were a blur of planning, strategizing, and mobilizing. Elise worked tirelessly with her team, coordinating efforts across the Confederation's fleet and ensuring that every faction remained on board. The task was immense, and the pressure was mounting. But they were united, and that gave her hope. The first wave of operations focused on neutralizing key rebel strongholds. The Confederation's forces, once fragmented and uncertain, now moved as one. The rebels, caught off guard by the sudden strength of the united front, struggled to maintain their position. One by one, their hideouts were uncovered, their leaders exposed, and their networks disrupted. Through it all, Elise held fast to the belief that unity was their greatest weapon. Every victory, no matter how small, proved that the Confederation could rise above the chaos. As the weeks passed, the rebellion's influence began to wane. The people began to see the strength of a united front, and support for the rebels started to fade. But the fight was far from over. Elise knew that the real battle would be for the hearts and minds of the people. The rebellion had been fueled by fear, by lies, and by the belief that they were better off alone. The Confederation's future depended on showing the galaxy that they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. As the final stronghold of the rebellion was overtaken, Elise stood at the command center, watching the reports come in. The tide had turned, but there was still work to be done. Trust had to be rebuilt, and it would take time. But the Confederation was no longer on the brink of collapse. The galaxy had seen the true power of unity, and Elise knew that this was just the beginning. The Confederation had been tested, and they had emerged stronger. There would be challenges ahead, but Ellis had faith. Humanity's resolve, the strength of their allies, and their commitment to a better future would ensure that the Confederation would thrive. As the sun set over the Unity Spire, Elise Kale looked out at the horizon. It was a new dawn for the galaxy, a dawn of hope, of unity, and of the endless possibilities that awaited them. The storm had passed, and together they would face whatever challenges came next.